All right. So we're here talking with James Vanderbilt about truth. Feel as if we should hook you up to a lie detector for this interview.
I know.
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, sir.
Okay, very good. So kids get obsessions with stuff, and it's usually stuff like toys or superheroes.
Mm-hmm.
When I was a kid, my father showed me All the President's Men, and for a while I was obsessed with Watergate.
Yeah.
When I was like 10. Anyway, and obviously something about journalism stuck with me as well.
Sure.
Can you talk about that film's influence on you and your own interest in journalism and what happens when you meet Robert Redford for the first time?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I saw All the President's Men. I was probably, I wouldn't say too young, because there's not a lot of content in the movie that's racy or something like that, but it was, I think it was probably 9 or 10, and certainly, was like, not, it wasn't like going to see Superman with Christopher Reeve.
Right.
And my parents had it on VHS, and my parents were real sort of cinephiles. They wanted me to, I saw Jaws when I was 8, which was probably too young to see that happen to that nice Robert Shaw. I was riveted by it, and it was one of those things that when I started to really get into films and try and figure out how films worked, I kept going back to it, because I kept going, what's the magic trick here? It's not that nothing is happening, but nobody's punching each other, there are no car chases, there's no, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Al Holbrook's smoking in a garage a lot, but other than that, that's the biggest, sort of exciting thing. The most exciting thing is Dustin Hoffman pretends to be somebody on the phone to get past the secretary.
Yeah.
So, how does this movie work? How is it so exciting? So it was something I kind of kept coming back to. And did the same thing. I started researching Watergate, I started learning more about it, and then I read Adventures in the Screen Trade by William Goldman, which is just the fascinating account of, from his perspective, how the script got written and how and so it meant a lot to me, just in terms of my filmic formative years. And then I wrote a movie that never got made called Against All Enemies that Robert Redford wanted to direct. So that's how I met him. And I flew out to Sundance with John Calley, the late John Calley, who's an amazing producer, and met Robert Redford at Sundance. And we had dinner, and then we went to the bar at Sundance, and he bought me a beer, and then he went to bed, and Tracy Falco's producer just said, Robert Redford just bought you a beer in his own bar. That's what your life is right now, which is a pretty incredible thing.
Yeah.
But it was just, he is the guy you want him to be, when you meet him. Robert Redford really is the Robert Redford you want him to be, which doesn't always happen, at least for me, when you meet kind of a legend that you've looked up to for so long. He's wonderful.
So Truth is based on Mary Mapes' book.
Yes.
What were your impressions upon reading her book and then upon meeting her in person?
The way I kind of came to it was, I read, they excerpted her book in Vanity Fair, and I was reading Vanity Fair, and I read this article, and I was fascinated by it. And so immediately went out. It did exactly what excerpts in Vanity Fair are supposed to do, which makes you go buy the book. So I went and I bought the book, and I read it, very quickly, and I'd been looking for something to direct for a little bit of time, and I had always been, probably because of All the President's Men, you mentioned it, fascinated with journalism. And if I hadn't gone into sort of, my silly industry, I would have pursued a career in journalism and really considered it actually in college. But so I always been sort of drawn to that world. So reading the book, I went, this is an amazing story. And it's a story that I would love to tell. And so I had my agent call Mary's book agent up, and say, there's this guy. And I'd just done a movie called Zodiac. So I'd done a movie about real people who were still alive and worked with them and portrayed them. And so I had a little bit of that going for me.
Yeah.
And they called Mary and they told her, and Mary said, listen, that's very nice, but I'm really not interested in a movie being made of my book. And she was very much still in a defensive crouch, I think, from what had happened. And so she was nice enough to get on the phone with me. And I said, look, I completely understand, but I'd love to come down there and just talk to you. And at the end of it, if you don't want to do it, I totally get it, no harm, no foul, but can I just come and visit? And she said, okay. And so my wife and I flew down there, and my wife is very charming, much more interesting than I am. So she brought my secret weapon. And we sat in Mary's living room for 2 days, and talked about everything but what had happened. We talked about her career, we talked about where I grew up, how she grew up, and everything. And at the very end of it, she kind of was, she said, okay, you know, I'll give you a shot. And so my manager, Nicole Bonison, and I both spent our own money and optioned the book on our own, which is like rule number one: don't spend your own money. We spent our own money, and sort of started interviewing her, and she was very, very. Not scared is the wrong word, but she was she was not in the best place. I mean, she really was still very battered from what had happened, and so there was a bit of a process of drawing her out of her shell a little bit, and from you know, she's a very strong woman, and in the book you can tell through her writing how strong and how passionate she is. But then also I got to see her in a very weak place where she felt very weak, and that actually, for me, dramatically was a gift. It sucked for her, and sucked for her to actually meet her at that low point, I think was wonderful for me as a filmmaker, because I got to see kind of the alpha and the omega of who she was.
Yeah. So Zodiac and Truth have in common putting you in the position of investigative journalist as a writer.
And Dermot Mulroney. Those two things.
Yeah, right. Right. So a lot of that had to be library or internet research, I presume, but tell me about your adventures in shoe leather, wearing down, double sourcing for these films.
No, well, both of them were we spent a lot of time doing that. And then on Zodiac, it was really a credit to David Fincher that he said, I had done the first draft of the script, and then we sent that to him. And the first draft of the script was based on Robert Graysmith's book, and I'd done research and I talked to a bunch of people, but Robert Graysmith's book used a lot of pseudonyms because, you know, he was like, I can't actually in print accuse the real person of this and print his name. Yeah. And so Fincher goes, yeah, that's great, but I need to actually say who we think this is. And the lawyers were like, well, you can't do that. And he was like, well, if we can't do that, I'm not going to make the movie. And so we sourced everything. We spoke to everybody we could. We knocked on doors. I mean, we spent an incredible amount of time with Dave Toschi, with Robert Graysmith, who was wonderful. Robert, who very kindly, when I was pursuing Truth, I asked to write a letter to Mary Mapes and say, Jamie Vanderbilt's a good dude, and, you know, please at least sit with him, and it was very nice. And Robert and I, like, Robert came to my wedding.
Yeah,
like, we went in deep. And we went, and Brian Hartnell, who was the stabbing victim at Lake Berryessa, who survived, came with his family to my producing partner Brad's wedding in Mexico with his whole family. So that's how deep we got into Zodiac.
Yeah. And for Truth, you spoke to the obvious people, the people on the team, but also spoke to some who had maybe a different take than Mapes.
We did, yeah.
And I'm curious who those people were and how they might have informed the script.
Well, they informed it a lot, and some of them spoke on the record, some of them spoke off the record. So it's sort of, you know, I don't want to go through everybody, but and because they, you know, I mean, like in journalism, you know, they wanted to say, look, I get it, but you should know X, Y, Z or X, Y, Z, and all of that really informed the script. I mean, it's a tricky thing when you're doing, and we found this in Zodiac as well, you're going to get different accounts of different instances from different people. And that's just the nature of people's memories. It's the nature of something that can be really volatile, and the nature of something where a lot of people lost their jobs, frankly, and who's at fault, who's to blame, and many different people have many different opinions on that. And so, you know, what I really tried to do was we sifted through sort of everything, and we talked to everybody that we could, and everybody that was willing to. Some people weren't obviously willing to. And then, you know, sort of boil that down, and then you just tell the story the best way you can through your protagonist's eyes, you know. And we always knew, you know, from the moment I read Mary's book, I always knew she was going to be our way through this. Yeah. And so, you know, we tell the story from her perspective, going through the events, and trying to take you on that journey too, which was sort of really important to not. It was important to me that the film not be, you know, dry in a weird way. That it not be. It's a procedural in a lot of ways, but then also there's an emotional component to the stuff she goes through and the stuff you kind of find out about her along the way, and that aspect of it was really important as well.
Yeah, it's a very compelling through line to get you through that picture. Yeah. The film repeatedly points out that the answer to this probably doesn't matter that much. But what do you consider to be the truth about the Killian documents?
I don't know. I mean, I really don't. and that's the thing that it's funny because I was talking to somebody about it, and they were like, you seem to really be drawn to these like unanswerable, you know, they're like, oh, you're making a movie about somebody who gets obsessed with something and almost destroys their life. You know, we can't know. I mean, it would be wonderful to find out someday. You know, I think there are such compelling arguments on both sides of it. And it was very important to us to put that stuff in the movie on both sides. It was very important for us to put that shot in the movie where you hold the documents up against Microsoft Word. And you eyeball it and you go, Jesus, I mean, you know? And to put in, you know, different, you know, fonts and, you know, and I think George Stephanopoulos at one point said, we've all become experts in fonts over the last few days. And that's absolutely true. But and that's why we call the movie Truth. It's sort of that idea of this thing we're all constantly after and trying to get to, and how elusive it can be, and how tricky it can be, and how you can lose your career and your reputation trying to find it. You know, it was a big thing for us. So.
So Truth is also partly a dissection of modern corporate culture. First, is there any hope for TV news in the age of infotainment?
I think so. I mean, you know, it's interesting. I think news is different now, and it doesn't do us any good to sort of go, oh, it used to be, you know, back in the old days was, because I don't, you know, you can make an argument that it was better before all of this, but that doesn't do us any good. You know what I mean? I think there's always hope. I'm a weirdly optimistic dude, I guess, but I think what it really comes down to is the journalists and you know, people who are willing to ask important questions of important people, and willing to pursue stories. And I think, you know, the great thing about it's the great and terrible thing about the internet is there are millions of different avenues and millions of different voices, but there are also millions of different possibilities to get information out, to learn, you know, what's going on. So I definitely think so. I think television news is trying to figure out what it is now. In a, you know, I mean, it's weird to see, you know, people covering what's on Twitter on television. It's sort of like it's sort of like someone on the radio talking about what they're watching on TV. You know what I mean? It's sort of like, and on this other newer thing, this is happening. So I think everybody's trying to catch up to technology right now, and where we go from here is going to be a really interesting thing. But I think this movie takes place at what was a very pivotal moment in media, where we sort of left the voice of God type of journalism behind and moved into much more of the modern age. And then we're at another fulcrum point right now, and it's going to take another 10 years for us to figure out what this all means right now. But,
and the second question about the corporate culture would be, by coincidence or design, you've had a strong relationship with the corporate parent, Sony. You've 7 out of 10 of your films have been for either Columbia or, in this case, Sony Pictures Classics. First, is that by coincidence or design? And secondly, what are the pros and cons of making art for a huge corporation?
The first one, it's somewhat probably more coincidence than design. The first, I think Basic was the first. There were a couple pictures that were sort of picked up by Sony or financed by Sony. Then I got to know Amy Pascal, who ran Sony for a number of years, who was wonderful, and she liked to hire me for stuff, and it was great, and it was the wonderful executive team there, Amy and Doug Belgrad is still there, Rachel O'Connor. So you know, you work with people you like, and so for a while that was sort of, I just kept getting jobs there, which was really, really nice. And then, but this picture was, we financed it independently. It was Brett Ratner's Rat Pack Entertainment and a place called Echo Lake Entertainment financed it, and then we showed it to distributors, and Sony Picture Classics stepped up and wanted it. So that was completely coincident. I mean, I'm thrilled by it, and Michael Barker and Tom Bernard, who run it, are amazing. But yeah, I was like, I'm back at Sony again, look at this. Absolutely. And then in terms of making entertainment for a large corporation, I mean, it's not, I don't know, Sony Picture Classics has been amazing with this film, and there's been no kind of, you know, and one of the great things about making it independently was we were able to go, this is the movie, would you like to release this movie? And they said, yes, we would like to release this movie. When you're making Spider-Man, it's a very different kind of situation, and it's but again, it's everybody is trying to do the best job they can and make the best film they can. And certainly with those films, it was like, these pay the bills. I mean, these
Yeah.
keep the lights on here.
Right.
So there was a lot of sort of pressure to do that. But Hollywood is a we're all just sort of silly folk who ran away and joined the circus and are trying to put on a show. So whether it be executives or or producers or writers or actors or directors, everybody's just kind of trying to do the best job they can.
Which of your scripts would you say have made it to the screen with your vision more or less completely intact?
Sure.
As opposed to, and then on which films did you learn the hardest lessons?
Sure.
About that.
I think this made it certainly. Although it was fun to blame the writer on certain days. I could actually go, who the hell wrote? Come on, to the actors. This one definitely, Zodiac was, an amazing experience because I also was soup to nuts the only writer on it. So I, and David's process was, we're going to work really hard and we're going to get the script right that we all believe in. You know, David's thing is he's uncompromising because he wants everyone to do their jobs. Which to him is not, it's not a big ask. It's your job, do your job. And that's what I love about him. And my job was, I'm the writer. So he expected me as the writer to write the movie, which is great. Sometimes they don't expect you to write the movie. Sometimes they expect you to take dictation. And that's not David Fincher. So that process was amazing for me, and I got to learn so much just from watching it. But I think that, these two are sort of the ones that are kind of closest to, sort of my vision. It's hard for me to say that. And then the ones I learned the biggest lesson on. I did a movie really early. Sort of the first thing I did that was mine was a movie called Basic that John McTiernan directed that did not turn out very well. And it was a difficult shoot. It was a difficult. I got taken off it. Which is, it's Hollywood. It happens, but it's the first time it happened to me, especially on something that I had invented and wrote. And sort of that was sort of difficult. And I had to rewrite the ending, and I didn't believe in what the ending was, but they were like, if you don't rewrite it, someone else will. So that was sort of the cliched, troubled production. Yeah. But I learned a lot in it in terms of, if I ever get to make a movie again, here's where I will compromise, and here's where I will stand my ground. And so it was, a millions of dollars film school for me to go through. But yeah, that was a tricky one.
So, what due diligence did you do before getting behind a camera for your first directorial effort?
I drank a lot. No, I did a lot of homework. I really, because it's not, everybody was like, oh, it's an extension of screenwriting. And I'm like, screenwriting is sitting alone in a room. And directing is being in a giant space with hundreds of people looking at you wanting to know what to do. I was like, that does not sound like an extension of screenwriting. That sounds like I was in sculpting and I'm going into airplane flight now. So I did a ton of, this is going to sound silly, I did a ton of reading. I read Directing Actors, which is a phenomenal book. John Badham has written a few books about directing actors, sort of like in a more practical manner. I read those. I've been lucky enough to work with a lot of directors who I really admired, and so I took a bunch of them to lunch at different periods of time and took a notebook and a pen and said, look, I'm going to buy you lunch, and could you spend 2 hours telling me how to direct a motion picture? And, ask them, I interviewed them, and I said, what are the things that you wish you'd known on your first picture? What should I watch out for? And I got all of this amazing, very practical advice, in terms of everything from when you get to set, the first place you go, and then, it's sort of Dean Pariseau, who's an amazing guy, sort of said, I'm going to walk you through a day, and said, he said, crew call is at 6. You want to be there 45 minutes before crew call. He's like, I know it sounds like it sucks, it doesn't suck, it's going to be great, because you're going to get there, and if you get there at crew call, something will be wrong. So you want to be there he literally walked me through a day, and just the most practical advice you could get, and it was so incredibly helpful. So that by the time we actually got onto the set the first day, I felt like I had a framework to work from, and I could just concentrate on the actors, which is really the job. It's everything else. There is someone to take care of. There is a production designer. There is a director of photography. Right. There is no director of actors. That's you. Yeah. So, that's really your job.
Do you remember any particular top tip that stands out that kind of saved you on the day?
going into, I mean, there are a few that I just was like, that's great. This is going to sound like the smallest thing in the world. I don't know if it was Dean who said it. Somebody said it. Always go to costume fittings. He said because you're gonna, he's like, and you have a movie with a lot of people in it, so you're not gonna get to spend time with all those actors during prep that much. But if you go to all the costume fittings, you will be there as they're figuring out their character, because they're trying on the clothes and how does this feel and how does this fit, and you'll be there. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to talk about character or process. Just be there. And it was great because there were certain actors who we didn't lock in until sort of right before they started. So having that time with them proved invaluable. And then the other thing that somebody said to me is, remember the crew moves with you. So, once you finish your shot, and this is so nuts and boltsy that maybe it's more a bit light, but it was so helpful to me. So once you do the last take on your shot, you know where the next shot is going, walk directly to there, and it will save 5 minutes because the crew will always move with you. And that was true. And so on days when we were super overscheduled, it was just like banging out. All right, let's walk over here. They bring the camera with you.
Yeah, that's a good tip. So a lot has gone down in Spideyland lately. Now,
I don't know. We're making Amazing Spider-Man 3, right? Is there something I should know?
Spidey's been recast.
I have to make a call.
Yeah, and the Amazing film series is kind of halted.
Yes.
So now the postmortems have begun, and so I just want to ask, in your view, what went right and what went wrong?
I mean, listen. It's a huge question.
Yeah.
I think that. I had a really good experience with it. My experience was I worked a lot on the first film, and then I wrote the first draft for the second film, but I wasn't around for the production of the second film. I thought that Andrew was a sterling Spider-Man. I thought, it was a great piece of casting, and I loved his take on it, and I loved that he was able to be very different than Tobey, without not being Peter Parker, which was sort of a great thing. I think he's a really wonderful actor, and I thought Emma was a really great Gwen Stacy. And when I came onto it, my whole pitch was I wanted to tell the Gwen Stacy Peter Parker story, up to and including the ending of it.
Yeah.
So that was something I really fought for. And when I first pitched the first movie, I said, and at the end of the second movie. Yeah. So for me, I'm proud that got to completion.
Yeah.
I don't know in terms of, I think that people really want to see Spider-Man in the Marvel Universe, and I'm one of those people. I think it'd be really, really great. And other than that, you just don't know. Sometimes things connect, sometimes they don't.
Yeah. Do you ever see yourself playing in that sandbox again, or do you think that's...
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I would never say never because I think that's just a recipe for it. But I feel like I did. I mean, I spent 5 years off and on those movies, and it was I started because I started writing Spider-Man 4 for Sam Raimi and Tobey Maguire. So it was so I went through all of that. I did a whole movie, and then got the call of, we have good news and bad news. We're not going to make Spider-Man 4, but we would love for you to write another Spider-Man movie that's not Spider-Man 4. So I wrote Spider-Man 4. I wrote a full version of Spider-Man 4. I wrote Amazing Spider-Man, and then I wrote a full version of Amazing Spider-Man 2. So I wrote 3 movies in that universe. So I think I don't know what else I could have them swing off of. I think I'm tapped.
See, Marvel should do a graphic novel of your script that's just sitting around.
Hey, never say never. But I think I'm excited to be a fan.
Let me ask one more question. Back to Truth. So, first-time director, and you're here working with the reigning Best Actress, right? Cate Blanchett, coming right off of her big win.
Yeah.
And again, Redford. Can you describe their processes a little bit and what you were able to offer them to plus their work even more?
Sure. Well, I mean, listen, I don't know what I was very happy to be there. My whole thing was just, I'd written the screenplay and I knew the real people, and so my approach to directing is really, I'm here to help you. You know what I mean? What do you need? What do you need to sort of get to the meat of the scene? What'll help you get there? And then if you're not getting there, I'll have maybe some thoughts on how to get there. But you're great actors, professional. How do you like to work? And Cate was very much like Cate is. She can do pretty much anything. She is like soup to nuts. She's like, I will work however you want to work. I will, you know. And so she ended up spending a lot of time speaking to Mary Mapes and Skyping with her and stuff and observing her. And it was really sort of amazing, because Mary is not a public figure, but if you know Mary, when you see Kate in the movie, it's like, oh, wow! You know what I mean? And that was her, you know, that's sort of the way she built the character, is sort of from that truthful place of who Mary is as a person. And then Bob, it was very much of a, you know, I thought it was really the big buy of the movie. By the way, I'm still amazed I get to call him Bob. With Bob and I, you know, the conversation he and I had very early on was the big buy in the movie is Dan Rather, because everybody knows what Dan looks like and everybody knows what Dan sounds like. He's sort of buried in our consciousness. Yeah. And I said, I think an impersonation is a trap. And I said, I don't want to put you in a bunch of prosthetics. I don't want to put you under a bunch of makeup. I'd like to gray your hair, and I'd like maybe to do a little vocal thing because of the southern twang and Dan's from Texas. And Bob was really excited. I mean, certainly didn't want to spend 3 hours in a makeup chair every day, so that was a win. Yeah. But also was like, you know, just play the character. If you play the character and play the scenes, people will, you know, there'll be 5 minutes where they go, oh, look, Bob Redford's playing Dan Rather. And then hopefully the story will kick in and they'll just go with the story. Yeah. And that was kind of the way we did it. And then, you know, you just do the scenes and you do them a bunch of times and you know, if there's something that they feel isn't working, you figure out what that is. And there's something that I feel isn't working, we figure out what it is. But it's a very, you know, I think the sets I love and the sets I've been on and gotten the best results from have been loose in the sense of it's a safe place, it's a place where people can experiment, it's a place where people can talk through stuff. And I think people do their best work when they're encouraged, not when they're yelled at, or not when they feel like, we gotta go, we gotta go, we gotta go. So my whole approach was, I'll be the barrier for that. Somebody can say in my ear, we're gonna be behind, and I will not let that get to this place where the actors are working. So that's kind of how I did it. And,
well, it's been fantastic talking to you. Thanks very much.
No, my pleasure, man. Thank you.